welcome to Uncommon Sense, where we do our best to make it common again. I'm your host, Adrian Ahlquist, and this week we're joined with another special guest, Brent Forrest. Brent, how are you?
Very good, Adrian. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, Brent is also on our board for the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, and that's great for us. And he is also, we're going to get into this, but he's also a professional magician, former professional magician, right? And I don't want to spoil too much because we're going to talk about your life and your experiences. But lastly, and maybe most importantly, most relevantly, he'll be talking at the virtual Chesterton conference, which is taking place on July 31st and August 1st. So
that's coming quick, yeah. It's coming fast.
Yeah, for sure. I know. So we're really excited for that. And if you haven't joined the conference yet, please do. It's free for members. So let's get into it though. Brent, I read your conversion story in My Name is Lazarus, and it seems like a pretty wild journey, right?
Well, that's a great place to start. Mentioning that is an amazing book that the Chesterton Society, your dad, Dale Ahlquist, put together as the editor of it. It's 34 stories, 34 chapters written each by different people from very different backgrounds. And what they all have in common is that somehow reading and being exposed to G.K. Chesterton caused them to be converted to the Catholic Church, which is pretty remarkable. And my story's in there. I got to write the story. And I don't have a reason to promote the book because I don't get royalties, you'll understand. But it is an book for people to buy. In fact, I have a copy. It looks like this. And one could go to the American Chesterton Society, chesterton.org, get a copy. This is beautiful reading. It's a great book. I loved meeting and knowing someone covered it here. So there's our lead in, right?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for promoting that.
The thing to me is a surprise. Everything in life that's really a great thing in life is not something you could set as a goal. I've decided that after many years. When we were young, they'd say, set a goal. You put the picture of the car you want, paste it on your refrigerator, setting goals, setting images. Well, a certain amount of things like that are fine. Like if you say, I'm going to exercise so many days a week and so forth. But everything of value, anything of any value whatsoever in your life, comes as a gift or a surprise. Like if you're going to fall in love with this wonderful woman and marry this woman, you can't design her ahead of time. God gives you this person and you go, wow, I'm in love. This woman is amazing. But how could you have written all that out and put it on your refrigerator? And becoming Catholic was the biggest surprise of the world. I joined the church less than 10 years ago, 2012. And I was 59 years old when I was received in the church. And even 3 or 4 years prior to that, had you said, you're going to be a Catholic, I would have said, no way. Just not even remotely. And it doesn't fit at all. But that's what I mean by gift, surprise from God. I'm still surprised, and I'm very, very, very grateful for it.
That's great. And
I grew up in Fort Myers, Florida, and which is a beautiful town on the Gulf Coast of Florida. And my parents ran a grocery store. My mother and dad were Depression-era kids. They didn't have a lot of education, and they wanted us to be educated. We worked in Daddy's store growing up, which was a fabulous experience for me. But I got interested in this magic stuff when I was a kid. And I think most boys, a lot of girls too, but most boys have a phase they go. Did you ever go through a phase where you want to do some magic?
I think so. I think I did, but I know that my younger brother did. I mean, he knows a lot of magic tricks and card tricks, and it's pretty impressive. So yeah, I'm sure he'd be inspired by you, right?
I've seen some of his stuff. I had the privilege of having dinner at your home a couple of times, and he was pretty good with those playing cards. He was really very good.
Nice, yeah.
Most kids go through that. I just didn't outgrow it. The magician came to the first grade, and he had these boxes and these colorful scarves and all these things, and I was entranced. And I went home very young, and I went home and I said, Mom, I'm going to be a magician when I grow up. And it really stuck. I went to college. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism. But the magic really was serious, and I did it for a living for about 15 years. It was my primary source of income. And I remember telling my dad as I graduated school, I said, I'm going to go do this magic thing. Well, he was horrified because he wanted me to have some kind of respectable profession. He said, well, I'd rather you be like a lawyer or a politician. And I look back and I'm thinking, I think being a magician was a more respectable line of work than being a lawyer or a politician.
That's unexpected. That's very Chestertonian, right?
Maybe, but I did do it for quite a while. I'm glad I didn't completely do it for the rest of my life. But it was just a joy. I got to travel a lot, got to meet some amazing people. And you learn things by being on stage that you wouldn't ordinarily experience otherwise. I think that's keys to it.
Wow. Now I have to ask, did you really drive a car blindfolded? Because that's one of the stories in My Name is Lazarus, but you don't go into a lot of detail there. So what about that?
Did I really drive a car blindfolded?
Yeah.
I absolutely did. Glad you asked. I was 19 years old, and I was wanting to do a publicity stunt because we were trying to promote a show that I was going to do at an auditorium, and we were selling tickets. So, and this was in my hometown. And I was 19 years old, and I went to the automobile, the car dealer that sold Lincoln, and the owner of the thing lent me a convertible Lincoln, if you can imagine, convertible Lincoln, brand new off the showroom. And I remember I went to the mayor because I was trying to get up, I wanted some publicity, things in the newspaper and so forth. And I went to the mayor and I said, we're trying to do some fundraising for a certain thing, we're going to have this show. And he shook my hand and said, I'm all for this. Just put it on record that I believe in this organization. And that was it. He kind of ushered me out the door. But I went to the sheriff, and our sheriff's name was Snag Thompson. Now, that's a great name for a Southern sheriff. He was our sheriff for years and years in my hometown. And Snag, he grabbed that right away. He said, yes, sir, son, I'll be there. And so he kind of officiated to make sure that everything was done correctly. And I don't know who had more courage, me driving the car or the guy who lent me the car.
Yeah.
Can you give him the keys to a 19-year-old kid? And they bandaged my eyes. They put this very thick black bandaging on my eyes. And then to make sure I couldn't peek up or down, because, you could do amazing, even blindfolded, you can peek pretty easily. That's an easy trick to do. So they took a thick black woolen bag, put it over my head, and tied it gently around the neck. So I had blindfold, bag over the head, and they led me over to the car. And I drove the thing 6 or 7 minutes just up to the sidewalk, with a stop sign around here and there. And a few people yelled and said, well, you've got a radio remote control in that car. And of course, I did not. Today, it wouldn't impress anybody with these self-driving cars. It wouldn't even be much of a trick. But that was probably the most dramatic thing I ever did as a magician. I never liked to do things that were very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got away unscathed. The car got away unscathed. The show sold a lot of tickets. The charity got a lot of money. And Snag Thompson was the man of the day.
Wow.
You gotta love a sheriff named Snag.
Yeah, I know. That's yeah. Wow. I really want to know how you did that.
Okay. Well, that's the part where, you hate that. They never tell you. The magician will never tell you that. Right. But it was a trick. And I was able to drive the car safely. And I had learned that trick from a man who had studied under an Indian magician who had the name Huda Bux. B-U-X was his last name, Huda Bux. And he used to have them put dough on his eyes. They took biscuit dough and press it into his eyes and then put duct tape over that. And in India, he just got on a bike and drove the bike around, blew people away.
Cool. Wow.
Huda Bux was the master of the blindfold. And I learned the secret from someone who learned it from him. And maybe I should do it again. We need to raise money for the Chesterton Academy.
Yeah, we should do that. Yeah, definitely.
probably crack for this time, you know.
Oh, that would be fun. That would be fun. Yeah, I remember when you asked me if I was interested in magic. I remember watching Penn and Teller, and yeah, and how they would show you the magic trick, how it's done, but then they still manage to fool you, right?
Those guys are excellent. They're great magicians.
Yeah.
Great, and I can't give them enough credit. Very original, very creative. In the magic world, there's not a whole lot new under the sun. But that's true of a lot of things. I even say that's true about religions. There aren't any new things under the sun. We just changed the names.
Yeah, and let's that's a good segue. So you grew up in this culture of magic, and you kind of mentioned how magicians think. How did performing magic and being in that culture shape the way you think, at least in your early years?
Yeah, it's quite a mix. Magicians tend to be, we're the kind of guys that want to look backstage and know how everything works. And we tend to be a little bit more to the rationalist side of things, more the skeptics. And I never met any magicians who were serious practicing magicians who pretty much weren't skeptics about most things. And we always wanted to, like in the Wizard of Oz, is don't look at the man behind the curtain. That's all we ever wanted to do, was look behind the curtain to see how everything worked. And it's an amazing psychology that you learn about how your brain works, how we fool one another, and the art of fooling people. But it caused me to be something of a skeptic. And I had an interest in everything that involved mystery. I don't care what it was, even the grandest mysteries. I wanted to know the secret of the universe. I wanted to study philosophy, religion, anything and everything. I studied hypnotism. I wanted to know how the seances work, the spiritualists and so on. So I spent years with a kind of a private quest, if you will, my inner life, my private life, doing a lot of reading and observing and questioning. And it took me a lot of different places. And I think really what I was trying to do, I was looking for God, I was looking for the truth about God. And that took me a lot of different places inside and out. And the story in Lazarus is not much of a life biography. It's an inner biography. It's a biography of my personal search for the truth. And that it actually makes a pretty interesting story because I get to leave out all the exterior details.
Yeah.
Anyway. Skepticism. I was thinking, I think I put this in the article about this. Will Rogers said that we are all ignorant. We're just ignorant about different things. And I have found that to be true of most everybody I've ever, the longer I've lived and more I've gotten to meet people who have pedigrees, money and businesses, successful doctors, people that are pedigreed. When you get to know them, they're just pretty much regular folks, and they've all got their blind spots. And so Roger said, we're all ignorant. We're just ignorant about different things. And my theory is that we're all gullible. We're just gullible about different things. And the joke is that modern men, they're very, the secular mind, the educated mind today, is very, very much opposed to anything very much opposed to Christianity for the most part, the metaphysics of Christianity. And so you've got someone who says it is impossible for me to believe in the real presence of Christ in that little piece of bread. That's crazy. There's no way any rational person could believe that the real presence of Christ is in that wafer. But then that same guy will say that he believes in infinite, multiple, parallel universes, which is a concept that comes from some variation of quantum theory. And they'll actually take that seriously and act like, science and math have proven this.
Right. I remember you mentioning, the quantum truths or quantum physics studies and stuff. And it's funny because a lot of these scientists and skeptics, they don't leave room for miracles, right? But when they study quantum physics, they will believe these. Every once in a while, there's a phenomena, like there are things that are unexplainable, and that's a pretty good definition of a miracle. Right?
Yeah, I can't even begin to get my brain around quantum stuff. But when they explain it to the layman, they'll say things like, for example, they'd say you can walk up and push against a brick wall. And if you do it an infinite number of times, you will go through that wall, and you'll come out on the other side in one piece. If you just push it enough time, that's pretty miraculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've been told that in the infinite parallel universes, that in some of them math isn't the same. So like in one of those universes, 2 + 2 might equal 5. And when I've been told that, that just blows the whole game for me, because the way they got there in the first place was using math. Anyway, it's amazing what we will believe in our modern culture and think that we're very, very rational, very, very educated. And quite a bit of bunkum floats around, especially nowadays in our popular culture.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I mentioned Penn and Teller. Who's the larger one, the tall one? Is that?
Are you thinking of David Copperfield?
No. Penn and Teller, where you have.
Okay. The big guy is he's Penn.
Penn, yeah. Because he's
Gillette, yes.
Right. He's known to be an atheist.
To this day he's a very typical magic guy. You know enough, and you because you get exposed to so many things. Mind reading. People say, I went to see this psychic, and there's no way she could have known what she told me. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, she could, because I know something about that business and how it works and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that sham has been used, is still used by a lot of these faith healer guys that stand up and knock people down with their hand, fall down in the Holy Spirit. So there's a lot of bunkum, and it's ugly stuff. It's very grossly misused. And so, I can understand Penn Jillette being an atheist. I can believe that.
Mm-hmm.
But it has its limits too. I was an atheist at one time. I've been a little bit of everything at one time.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. Do you want to go into detail there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. All I ever do is digress. So
no, it's totally fine. I want you to be able to do that here.
Digressing is what I do for a living now. For some reason. I grew up in the South, and a grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher in his spare time. He ran a little grocery store, general store, as did most people in my family. But when I was a little kid, we would go to church, and he's up on this platform. And Pentecostal preachers, they get very loud, they get very emotive. Oftentimes they'll start out kind of calm, and it's like a building of this energy until they're finally hollering and running up and down the stage or whatever. And I remember him grabbing a folding chair and slinging it and holding it over his shoulder and walking up and down the platform. It was rather attention-getting. And that was drama, and it was Pentecostal religion. And that was my first impression of religion, and I was fascinated by it. I kind of liked the show business part of it. I thought that was pretty cool. But I grew up in what Flannery O'Connor called the Christ-haunted South. Jesus is everywhere in the South where I grew up, and he was both incredibly appealing, and also the religion, as I was exposed to it over time, was very frustrating. I was drawn, and then I was also put off. What I realize now, some 50 years later, is that a lot of what I was exposed to would be technically called heresies. I used to think, as many people would, that heresy is something diabolical. Like, if you practice witchcraft, you should be burned at the stake for heresy. And actually, that's not true at all. Heresy is something that is Christian, but is a little lopsided. You take a part of the gospel that's true and real, overemphasize it to the neglect of other things. And that lack of completeness, that lack of wholeness, creates a very dangerous thing that can be very appealing.
It's a virtue run wild, as Chesterton would probably say, right?
Yes. A good example, it would be like the positive thinking preachers. When I was a kid, it was Norman Vincent Peale that came up, and Robert Schuller behind him. They preached a positive thinking gospel. And the guy that does that today, is making millions doing it, is this Joel Osteen guy. And they're very appealing, very, very charming, very appealing. And many people are drawn to it and say it's Christian, it's Bible, it's so forth. But it is heretical because it is lopsided. It doesn't take in the whole truth. I remember people saying, I could never be Catholic. You go in there and they always have Jesus hanging up there in a bloody mess, hanging on that cross. How, why don't they talk about celebrating that he rose from the dead? Why don't we just have an empty tomb up there instead of this bloody cross? And my comment lately is, I said, well, see, that's called honesty in advertising. The Catholic Church is saying, we cover all the bases, from the greatest pain to the highest glory. There is a completeness, a wholeness in the Catholic Church. And so if you want to go to Joel Osteen's place and feel good and have positive thinking, that's fine. But there's not much room in that aspect of religion for things that really go wrong, where you sin or someone in your family sins irretrievably. What do you do when there's so much pain and suffering? Something grotesquely unfair happens. You live through a famine or a genocide. And there's no room for that kind of pain and suffering. Only the Catholic Church encompasses all a human experience, and Christ is there in all things.
Darn,
Well,
you kind
very far. Pardon me?
You kind of answered my last question I was going to ask, which was, what does Catholicism have that these other beliefs that you looked into, what they don't have?
It has the truth, and I know that's just a loosey-goosey word in our world today. But I'm going to tell you, I digress so bad. I'm going to say, folks, you have to read. You have to read Lazarus now, because I'm leaving out most everything good in the story. There's a completeness, there's a wholeness. That was what the word Catholic means. And I had pursued everything. I read philosophy. I loved Emerson when I was young. I loved Henry David Thoreau. I did follow some of the positive thinking preachers for a while. I remember I read a lot of Norman Vincent Peale. And there was a big book back when we were young called Think and Grow Rich. It's still around. And to show you how to make money and how to be happy and successful by positive, powerful thinking. And I remember in my early 20s, I decided that I was an atheist for all the reasons a rational thinker, just for all the reasons that Penn Jillette, the magician, was an atheist. That was a kind of an achy, lonely feeling. And I remember at some point, something in my heart just kind of cracked. It's because I was raised around a Christian family. However crazy we were, I was raised in a home that held the Bible and believed in Christ. And so I remember feeling this brokenness out of the blue. And I started just kind of crying out in my heart. It was like this aching child. And what happened is I fell into, at that time, it was the early 70s, I fell into what was called the charismatic movement, the evangelical charismatic movement. It's really extra, of course, it's still around. It's perfectly legitimate. But I was a born-again Christian and going to these large community churches, and I had found Jesus, and I really went after that for several years. And there was much beauty. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. You get a lot of the Bible. I love the New Testament. I actually memorized a lot of it. I love the New Testament so much. I played this game with my friends, and I'd say, take the Bible, open up somewhere, anywhere in the New Testament, and read me a line, and I'll tell you what it's from. And most of the time, I could nail it. Oh, that's
wow. You should have a Bible off with my dad. I remember he memorized the book of James and decided.
He would beat me every time. He's sharp, and it's been a long, long time since I was able to play that game. But I love the scriptures. But I went long enough into that, and I even went to I was going to be a minister in the Southern Baptist tradition, and I went to a seminary for a year and a half, and I was working on getting a Master of Divinity degree. And that's a 3-year deal. And I did about half of that. And I became very disenchanted with it. And also, I had been backstage so much around so many religious people and so many religious things. I found a real distaste for it in certain ways. And there was just something missing. There was just something that wasn't quite connecting. It wasn't quite right. It wasn't quite there. And then I got on this kind of probably close to 40 years old, and all of a sudden, kaboom, I started reading Friedrich Nietzsche. And I went back to being an intelligent, informed, brilliant atheist this time. Nietzsche's fascinating to read. And I think I went on a Nietzsche kick for nearly 4 years. Very powerful, very brilliant writer. His father was a Lutheran pastor, and I think Nietzsche was, you talk about someone's haunted by God. He was obsessed with God, even though he's the fellow who famously is attributed the line about the death of God. Which, by the way, Nietzsche never...
Out of context, right?
Yeah, and what he says really is amazing. He really says something about what's happened in the last 100 years, especially.
Because it wasn't a victorious claim. God is dead.
Well, yeah, it's a beautiful poetic image. The old madman comes, is howling, and the guys are in the tavern at night, and the wind is howling, and this madman comes in, he's holding this lantern. Yeah, and they say, everybody knows he's the town, the town crazy. And they said, what's going on there, crazy? He said, well, I'm looking for God. And they said, well, what are you nuts? He said, don't you know, we've killed him. God is dead. And there's no up, there's no down, there's no true, there's no fall. And off he goes. So the whole story is, and it goes, who is great enough? Who is big enough to have done this? Well, he's talking about our culture. He's talking about the universities of our day right now. Mm-hmm. We've killed God. We don't have an up, a down, or a sideways. Are we strong enough? Are we big enough to handle that job? And of course, the truth is no, we are not and never have been. Though Nietzsche wanted to propose that the men could be strong enough to actually face, just live in the reality there is no God.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm sorry, I go too far afield there. It took me a while to digest him, but I just went through so many things. I read a lot of religion. I read a lot of philosophy. I used to go, when I would go to bookstores, I would always go to the philosophy section. And I loved to go to used bookstores. I bought a whole wonderful bunch of, $3 and $4, you can buy a hardcover book. And my joke is that all the treasures in my house are books, most of which were bought at used stores for $5, so they can come steal my television, or I don't care. All my treasures are my books, and nobody would want them anyway. So anyway, how are we doing for time? Because I know you want me to get to the part about the conversion, the church, and of course G.K. Chesterton.
We're doing fine on time. You can talk as much as you want.
Oh, you're the best. Okay, well, I'll try to stay on task though.
I want to hear about Spinoza too. I think we should.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. And Spinoza is really not read much at all. He's a famous philosopher. He was.
Wait, I'm gonna make my brother ashamed of me. But was he a rationalist or an empiricist?
Oh, aren't you bad? I think he would fall for rationalism, but I could be mistaken.
I think he was rationalist because he was right after Descartes, right?
Yeah, he's definitely in Descartes, and Descartes is kind of flat-footed and empty. Spinoza, there's a richness and a beauty there. He was raised on Orthodox. He was Jewish. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and he had such a powerful, rational mind, but he had this deep love of God, and his God was somehow truthfully, as our Bible teaches, God was infused, informing, and intelligent in all of nature. But his God was very rationalistic, very mechanical, which was the thing he knew back then. He wanted to say that philosophy and things of God were as mechanical and exact and predictable as, say, Euclidean geometry. Like when you hit the cue ball across the table at a certain angle and the other ball responds at the other angle. Everything in the universe is that way. It was very materialistic, extremely materialistic. But it had woven through it, I can't quite explain it, but there was this spirit of the Ruach Yahweh, which I can't pronounce that, but that means the wind of God. Throughout the Old Testament, the Spirit of God was related to wind, the wind of God. And then we have the term today, pneumos, or pneumatic, is air. And so in the New Testament, Jesus breathes the Spirit. some people would say the Ruach Yahweh blows through his philosophy. It does. It's like a wind. But it's not ultimately satisfying. What's wrong is it's a heresy. It's a beautiful heresy. It's sweet. You got to love the guy. He was a precious man, a private man, an intellect like you can't imagine. He constructed a philosophy in the similar way that a mathematician would build a structure. And there's a lot of beauty in it. There's a lot of peace in it. And it was a really nice place to get some nurturing and healing after being such a radical Nietzschean for a while. But even Spinoza, they called him the God intoxicated philosopher. I think that's what God intoxicated. But he too was at best is quite a heresy.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, but modern scientists would also disagree with him because he's basically lobbying for Newtonian physics alone.
Oh yeah, that's the best thing they had. That's all they knew.
Yeah,
Very well. You can run rings on me about that subject too, but he had a pretty clean mechanical world. This quantum stuff would have just sent him into loops, wouldn't it? Something to say about Spinoza one more time. That's okay. There's a digression where I don't know where to go.
Oh, well, I can help. Have you read Leibniz? Because I think he's another rationalist, and he's
in that loop. He's in that.
Yeah,
loop.
He invented calculus or discovered calculus at the same time as Newton in totally different places. It's pretty remarkable. So you have Leibniz, and then you have Descartes, who created the way we graph things in two-dimensional space today. And they're both philosophers as well. And it's amazing because I mean they did such amazing things in the realm of mathematics, and then you have them as philosophers, and they're still brilliant. But I mean, like, yeah, they kind of are a little off, right?
Yeah, but it's little wonder that they were grasping for the truth, because you had that stuff going on and saying, look, we never had anything like this before. We have science and math now that's really, really unfolding the truth about our physical world. Mm-hmm. And that was true. And so they're thinking, everything is subject to this, including the metaphysics, how the universe works. So I pursued those things, but Spinoza left me empty. I remember I got to the point where I would go back to some of my favorite passages and reread them. I used to do this with Emerson. I love Emerson's writing. It's beautiful. But it used to give me such a lift. And then later I would go back and try to get the lift again by rereading those passages. But they don't hold up long term. G.K. Chesterton is the man who really changed my thinking in my life. And he did so when I was in my mid-50s. I'd heard of him. I knew who he was. I knew he was a famous writer. I had known somewhat that he was in favor of traditional Christianity. But I remember I had been in an Ayn Rand thing for a while, if you're familiar with her whatsoever. And she's kind of considered a schlock or pop philosopher, but her book Atlas Shrugged it's been in hardcover edition since 1945. It's never out of print. She was a brilliant woman, and she was a very rigidly clear thinker. And she'd come from Russia as a kid at age 17. She learned to write in English by looking at a Russian-English dictionary. And she wrote a book that was just a massive bestseller.
Wow.
But she was an anti-communist because she saw the evils of the Soviet, of the Marxism. And she would recognize the evil of the Marxism we're living with right now in our country. And she understood advantages in honest capitalism as opposed to not distributism, but rather redistribution program, Marxism, which is really a godless thing of its own. Mm-hmm. But Ayn Rand she's amazing. She's an atheist. She has this incredibly brilliant mind. She constructs a philosophy called Objectivism, and she actually absolutely believes and says that she has unriddled the universe. Like, she believes her philosophy explains everything. It's complete, it's airtight, you can't refute it. And there was a lady that came to her home one night years ago, at this true story, and the lady said, what do you mean? You can't possibly convince me that you've got everything figured out. And she said, well, let's put on a pot of coffee and we'll talk about it. A few hours later, the woman says, I'm convinced. I can't argue against your logic. It's airtight. I understand that Schopenhauer, who is a philosopher I never read, but he was a real character. He believed that he had unriddled the universe. And he wore a ring that looked like the Sphinx. And that symbolized the fact that the Sphinx didn't have anything on Schopenhauer. He had unriddled everything. It's amazing. But why do I go there? Because these were complete systems and they were hard to refute. It was very hard to argue with Ayn Rand, and much of what she taught about communism and markets and crony capitalism, the evils of it, she was right on. She was spot on. The Atlas Shrugged is a book worth reading about political things, but it wasn't complete. And I really remember I was just lost. I realized I am virtually exhausted. I don't know how many more angles I can pursue. There's truth in everything, but nothing's complete, nothing's satisfying. And I read Orthodoxy. Don't ask me when or why. I can't remember why I came into possession of it, but I knew who he was. I read Orthodoxy, and in a couple of hours, I think, a couple of hours of reading, he answered for me things that had puzzled me all of my life. Mm-hmm. And I remember him talking about, just like Ayn Rand's philosophy is airtight, irrefutable, and complete. But he said, a bullet is round like the world, but it's not the world. And it was a perfect way of talking about
because
that.
It's too small, right? That's what
it's too little. Yeah, it's too small. And so it's like, yes, Ayn Rand, your whole universe works, but it's just not a very big place to live now, is it? Since your mind can comprehend it all. There were so many things he did. He begins to tear down so many of the illusions that we pursued in all kinds of philosophical things. And he does it not so much with syllogisms and arguments of a traditional style. I don't think he does. He paints pictures. He paints images. And he tells stories, and he's very, as you know, very gentle, very mild-mannered, very good-humored. Mm. But he's clear, he's definite. You can take him pretty much at face value, particularly in Orthodoxy. If people say, I don't know how to read that book, I said, well, read it out loud and take him at face value. And if you don't understand, just keep going back. He's not lying. When he says, I'm not trying to be funny, I'm speaking of these paradoxes, and I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to tell the truth. He means that. And of course, he tells the truth, and it happens to be very, very funny. But that was the beginning. It turned me in the direction of, you can't read Chesterton without having your worldview shifted. And he made me so happy. I was like, oh my gosh, peace. And his truth is large. It's larger than his brain, larger than mine. That whole pursuit as the philosopher is you're trying to get all the truth of the cosmos inside your head. Like, I've got to figure it out. I got to capture this. And all that's going to happen, he says, is your head's going to burst. It does. You just get a massive migraine and explode, I guess. But he says, no, but the Christian, and I'm paraphrasing, gets to put his mind, his head into the cosmos with this infinite room to live and to breathe. He also talks about the Catholic Church and says that it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. That was absolutely fascinating. I went to a Chesterton Society book club meeting in San Antonio, Texas, where I was living. I think I started in 2010. I went to my first meeting. They were all Catholics except me. And I shipwrecked their meetings because we were there to discuss the readings and so forth. And I'd be asking all the Protestant questions about marriage. So drawn in. Chesterton has his 3 stages of conversion. And that's where, for the first time, if you simply let down your prejudices and give the church a break, say, I'm going to look at this objectively, because I don't have to tell you there's a huge amount of disinformation about the Catholic Church. And the church can't get good press, Some of them can't get press because it hasn't done good things. It's been a mess for years. But the culture is not very kind. And where I grew up, we were told so many things about the Catholic Church that weren't true. But he says, you give it a chance. And I began to do that. And what you find is this incredibly beautiful thing. So much beauty, so much history, and it unfolds and it unfolds. The second thing that happens, once you're fair to the church, you start falling in love with it. Say, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful, glorious thing. And then something dawns on you, and you realize, uh-oh. And then you start running away from it. You got like, I'm taking off. Because you realize that what you've been studying and evaluating, what I've been judging and evaluating, what do I think about this thing? Suddenly I realize it is judging and evaluating me. And the church is putting to me a question, a philosophical, existential question that is not theoretical. It requires a real, authentic human response. Now, that's frightening, but it's also starting to hit bottom. I was always wanting to put my feet where the truth was. And it's in the Catholic Church, it's in the Catholic faith. And Chesterton was the teacher of the catalyst. C.S. Lewis said, be careful what you read, because an atheist is in trouble if he reads Chesterton. And as you know, Mr. Lewis was converted by Chesterton. Right. I think I'm time clock out, my friend.
Well, that's a good place to end with your journey home, right?
Very well chosen words, Mr. Marcus Grodi. Yeah.
I hope we don't get a lawsuit.
Journey Home is a good title for that show.
Yeah.
Adrian, your family, I've had time, who would have thought? I'm on the board of directors of the International Apostolate, the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm on the board of directors. I get to be around all these wonderful people. So it's less than 10 years ago that I was received into the church. This is another gift in my life. This is a stage of I retired. I sold my investment business years ago. We didn't talk about that, didn't need to. But now that I'm retired, this work and helping to promote the Chesterton Academy, which is the students coming out of the Schools Network Academy, they are the answer to how do we fight this cultural decline. And so that the best place to end is on that. Say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for promoting the Schools Network as well. Yeah.
Oh, it's vital. Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's plan another time so I can do more, but you need to put a wrap on me today. You are a light, Adrian. Thanks.
Yep. I hope to do this again soon, because this is very fun. Maybe we'll talk about another magic trick you did.
There's plenty of that.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, but thank you so much, Brent, for talking to us. And again, he's going to be Brent Forrest is going to be talking at the virtual Chesterton conference in about a week and a half now, or 2 weeks, right? And
promise not to digress.
What? Sorry.
I promise not to digress.
Yeah, but no. So Brent Forrest on our board, and let's say, oh yes, I should probably plug our society. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're almost to 10,000 followers on Instagram, so that will be a big event when we get there. So please follow us there, and thank you. I think that's it. Thank you, Brent, and thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, help us to make uncommon sense more common. See ya.